I spent the last few days testing out ChatGPT's new agent mode, pushing it on real-life tasks to see where it can actually deliver. In this video, you're going to see it tested on everything from tasks I typically give to an executive assistant, to building your content strategy, automating market research, and most importantly, working through very complex and dated legacy websites that most automations and tools can't even touch. To make one thing abundantly clear, it's still super slow and can hallucinate a decent amount depending on the task, but it's a huge step change from having ChatGPT Operator because now this agent mode can reason, think, and call on different tools and tasks at the same time. I'm going to break down what agent mode is and walk through 10 different use cases that I tested it on, and also walk you through the methodology of prompting it. You'll get an honest look as to whether or not agent mode deserves its place in your day-to-day workflow, or if it's just the V1 of many versions to come. Let's dive right in. So when you log into ChatGPT, you'll be able to see at the top left, you can choose pretty much any model, and all you have to do is click on Tools on here, and then you'll be able to select this agent mode. When you click on agent mode, it'll automatically remove whatever model you're using because it's using its own fine-tuned version of a model, and then it'll give you some suggestions as to the different types of tasks that you could execute. Now, the sources icon is really where the potency of using agent mode kicks in. If you click on it, you'll see that by default we have web search, which makes sense, but you can also enable things like reading your Gmail, your Google Calendar, Google Drive, or all of them at the same time, along with a series of connectors. And these connectors go to all kinds of different CRMs and resources. And I think over time, this will become akin to the App Store, where we're going to have hundreds of different connectors that a single agent can take advantage of and use in sequential order. And what's helpful is if you look at the individual connectors, it will tell you what features of ChatGPT it's compatible with. So you can see that GitHub, Gmail, and Google Calendar work right out of the box with agent mode. And the main idea is, compared to something like deep research, which uses an indexed version of the web. So when it actually retrieves a website, it's not actually getting technically the live information on that website as of today. It's indexed as of a snapshot as a point in time. Whereas agent mode can do browser automation, go on the live web page, and more importantly, execute actual tasks, whereas Operator and Deep Research lived as two separate products. Now with that primer out of the way, let's jump into use case 1 of 10, and we'll go through from lower complexity to higher complexity to walk you through all the different things that agent mode can take on. So for this first example, I gave it a task that I would typically give an executive assistant, which is I need to find an Airbnb in Toronto, Canada for a trip from October 15th to October 20th, 2025. Now, I purposely added this here at the bottom to see how it would handle confusion, because I said 2025 here, but I put 2024 as the check-in date. So I wanted to see, does it have an extra set of logic that will override and focus on the initial thing that I mentioned? And for the remainder of the prompt, I just specified things like price range, number of bedrooms, property type, the amenities I need, and then nightly price that I'm looking for, overall rating, etc. And then the core goal is to provide a short list of the top 3 to 5 most suitable listings that strictly meet all criteria. Now, if you think that I wrote this prompt myself, you are sorely mistaken. What I actually did is I went to ChatGPT, I chose something like 04 Mini, and I just said something along these lines. I want you to act as a prompt engineer and put together a step-by-step prompt for this AI browser agent that you haven't met before. I want it to be able to go on the Airbnb website and find me the top 3 listings possible in Toronto for less than $500 a night, and ideally that has parking between October 15th to October 20th, 2025. I sent something along those lines, and then you get a prompt like this, where it's structured step by step, and it gives it enough instructions that it goes into a level of detail that I'm probably way too lazy to do myself. Once we have that version of the prompt, it goes and it questions me, as it should. I noticed a small mismatch between the trip dates in your question. The dates described as 2025 versus 2024. Now it ends up waiting for my response, which never comes, so it continues on its own, and it autonomously decides that the more logical idea is probably not booking something in the past, it's booking in the future. Even though one little note here, we still have OpenAI or ChatGPT trained as of 2023. So technically, 2024 and 2025 are in the future in the grand scheme of how it looks at dates. But it was logical enough to choose the very first thing that I mentioned. Now, if we click on this worked for 14 minutes, we'll be able to see the entire replay of what it did. And we're not going to watch the whole thing, obviously, but you're going to see it's going to go onto the website, look for the destinations, input Toronto, Canada, and the core difference between this an operator is as it's clicking around, it's not just interpreting what it sees on screen, it's also thinking through what is the natural next step that it should execute. So it enters the date, it goes to October, it's smart enough to be able to click into it, and the speed of its click is still super slow compared to a human being, but compared to operator will sometimes spin just on this one task over and over again. And after it receives a series of listings, it pulls up the filters tab to go through all of my preferences, play it back, and you can see it actually changing the maximum to $500 a night, going down, looking for parking, and it's able to interact with the browser and screen in a way that's a lot more effective than it has been in the past. And as it's going through the listings, it's going to open each one, look through whether the cleaning fee and all the additional fees you see on Airbnb add up to $500 a night or less, and then it will basically save it to its own memory, screenshot it for its own basically storage, and then go back to the tab and keep going through the listings over and over again. It's also smart enough to not only know when the page is loading, but also look for things like the number of reviews and the quality of the host on Airbnb. So it's going through, keeping track of all of that, and the result is we get something like this, where it's a table of all the different names of the actual Airbnbs. We have the number of bedrooms, the nightly price, the total price, and then reviews and ratings. Now, one thing is, even though it gives us this tidy table, some of these Airbnb links don't work. So I ask it, can you give me the raw hyperlinks? And then it still has it in memory. So these actually do work and do take me to the underlying Airbnbs. So if I click this should take us to the very one that it took a look at while it was executing its research. So that's an easy one. Let's look at a slightly more complex use case. For the next use case, I wanted to see if Agent Mode could go on something like Google search trends and find a way to compare different keywords and come back with data about all the comparison over the last 12 months. So in this case, I asked it to conduct a Google search trend comparison for the following keywords over the last 12 months. So all of them being automation platforms, the first one being Anyden, the second one being Make.com, and the last one being Zapier. And then I go through what the steps should be. And once again, I just asked AI to put together this step-by-step guide for it. And even if this is directionally accurate, even if these instructions are set as of 2023 for what that website looked like then, I still found it to be a lot more effective to give a cheat sheet for what it could do versus having to send a very vague prompt and pray they can figure it out. And this is where we would say that obviously this is the worst it's ever going to be. But in the future, my goal would be, I want to be able to give as vague a prompt as possible, and it naturally extrapolates all of this. So what's cool in this use case is it sets up its own terminal because it knows it has to process data and maybe even create some form of analysis on that data. So then it goes through and looks through how to get to Google Trends, which takes a bit of time, but eventually it finds the site. Once it finds the site, it puts together Anyden, is smart enough to go and click on Compare, add Make.com, and finally Zapier, and then you get the 3 different line charts superimposed on each other and over the last 12 months. And once it has the comparison, it clicks on the Download CSV button to import that CSV so it can actually execute its analysis right after. And you'll see right here, it's loaded the CSV, it's taking all the different dates over the last 12 months, putting together the analysis all the way until July 20th, 2025, and then going back to double check and see whether the trend on screen matches what it sees in the data to come up with its overall assessment. And the result is this table where it has all the little data points. And what we can do is ask it to recreate the visualization by saying create a beautiful visualization based on the data. And we can basically recreate exactly what we saw on screen there. Now, one flaw is I wish that I was able to maintain in memory the table that it outputted, because for some reason when I said create a beautiful visualization, it thought for a few seconds and it said, it looks like the multi-raw file I used to build a table isn't available in execution. It should have been smart enough to know, well, we have it right here, go and use it. But what I did is I just copied the table, pasted it into here, and then it moved on to use O3 to put this table together. For the next test, I wanted to push it on the real estate domain. So I asked, I am a real estate investor researching 3-bedroom single-family homes as potential rental properties in Orlando, Florida. Please access major online real estate platforms, and I mentioned a few, to find the current average listing price for these types of homes. Now, typically there could be a series of APIs and services that you could use to interface with, but I wanted to see, could we skip that by just using browser automation instead? And the goal is to compile this information into a table showing the average listing price, average rental income, and calculate the estimated gross yield. So it spins up yet another browser, and if we click through right here, you'll see that it starts off on Zillow, going through, filtering on all the things we saw worked in Airbnb, the different filters by the different home types as well, and it goes through from site to site to collect this information. In between going on the sites, it goes and actually reads some additional research to inform itself on the average rent price in general, but I do think it should have calculated the average rent based on looking at all the listings instead of offloading or outsourcing that knowledge onto doing some deep research. And this is Exhibit A. You can see this is already somewhat of a dated site, and it's going through to look for the average rent on some additional article instead of just doing the research empirically off of those core websites. And then another odd thing it does is it looks for very particular addresses for some reason versus just taking the average of a series of listings that it goes through. Now this could be an issue with my prompt where I could have said something more specific, like go through only the listings on the page and calculate solely off of those numbers. But again, this is a good example of being vague is not good enough yet for agent mode to do what it needs to do. So we get this resulting table, but once again, you can see that we're getting information on the average rent from Rentometer, renthop.com. There's one mention of Zillow, but if you remember, I mentioned things like realtor.com, and it's very much indexed on a series of addresses for some reason. It's giving me a sample, but I never even asked for a sample. I asked for an average of all the listings. So good example of having to be more specific, and in general, you want to double and triple check the results you get from something like an agent mode because it's still prone to hallucinations just like everything else in GenAI. On the SEO side, I wanted to ask the following. I run a blog about sustainable living and I'm looking for new content ideas that will perform well in search engines. Can you please use a keyword research tool like Google or Ahrefs and identify 5 high volume, low competition keywords related to zero waste lifestyle? Now, one thing you could do is actually ask it to go to something like a SEMrush, allow you to log in and take over and use SEMrush to come up with this information. And if you don't know what SEMrush is, it's more so one of the top tier paid solutions for doing the SEO keyword search compared to these more free alternatives that aren't as dependable. Now, one more thing I asked for is I want you to identify common themes and formats of the top ranking articles and suggest a unique blog post topic for each keyword. Please present your findings in a document. Now, one thing you'll notice is that if you don't provide explicit URLs or hyperlinks, it will go and do research to find a way to get to those websites. So if you want to cut that time in half, I highly recommend you give the actual URLs it needs to go to versus just relying on it to figure out and do a Google search, which seems very rational and simple, but generative AI is not rational most of the time. It spends the lion's share of its time looking for a free keyword research tool, which it eventually finds called WordStream, and then it looks for the zero waste lifestyle keyword we're looking for, and then it basically bases its entire research off of this website. Now, eventually, it seemingly gets bored of the initial task I gave it and goes and researches zero waste living and ends up on some pages that have nothing to do with my command of looking for keywords. It basically took the keywords from that one free website, logged them, and then went to search on sites that I didn't ask for. So it ends up on this 5Rs website that doesn't seemingly have anything to do with SEO and comes to some form of conclusion at the very bottom here, where it's an overview primarily just based on WordStream, nothing else. It didn't try to vary its search results. And then it gives a series of disclaimers here, and then its own opinion from a series of websites that it went on that had related content to zero waste lifestyle. So we're not even halfway, and it looks like agent mode is better suited as a virtual assistant, more so than a comprehensive executive assistant. For this next use case, I wanted to see if agent mode could take on the admin task of going through something like Alibaba to help us find suppliers for a new product line we're coming up with. So here we say, I'm launching a new line of organic skincare products and I need to find a reliable supplier for my packaging. I'm looking for a company that can provide me with 10,000 units of 50 milliliters amber glass dropper bottles. I then say, can you please search for suppliers on Alibaba? What would have been better, like I said before, if I gave it the exact hyperlink so it doesn't spend time trying to navigate its way to that website. And then I say, filter by the highest rated and reviewed vendors, and make sure they have reviews. I meant to say here, real reviews. And specifically, I ask it for 3 potential suppliers with their pricing, minimum order quantity, lead time, and customer reviews, and please include a link to each supplier's website. And what it does is it searches by product and then finds its way to the website through that way, which is more efficient than some of the other use cases we saw so far. And what happens next is a pivotal moment where it's going to hit a wall that most of these AI agents will continue to hit in the future, where it hits this screen that detects unusual traffic, which is totally sensible and rational for the website to detect. And then basically agent mode goes into refuge and does deep research and reads about the products externally versus the actual website itself. Now, what should have happened here is it should have brought me in to take control to get us onto the site and maybe click on that verification so it can continue its research. So it stays in research mode where it reads about the products without being on the website. We get some form of table here, but once again, this is not an alternative to a human doing this because it was not able to at least have the initiative to let me know there was a problem so I could step in. Because one of the features of agent mode is while it's generating, you should be able to give it feedback. Unlike Operator, where you send a prompt and you pray that it works, you should be able to intervene. So it should have basically done a human-in-loop call to allow me to come in and step in. This next use case in the e-commerce world is a more sensible use of agent mode, where it's just a step up from normal deep research, where you can visually see what it's doing, versus having to rely on some sidebar where you track each and every website that it apparently goes on. So in this case, we said, my e-commerce business sells handmade leather goods, and I'm considering expanding my market to either Australia or United Kingdom. I need you to conduct some preliminary research and use Google to find recent articles and market reports on the size and growth of the online leather goods market in both countries. And then I give it some more specifics. I tell it to summarize its findings. And this is honestly one of the better uses of using agent mode, which is just a step up or a more visual representation of deep research. So if we just click through here, it goes through, reads through a series of websites, it navigates some additional reports, it Googles things like best handmade leather goods in the UK, 2024 and 2025. At least it knew that we're in this range of dates where it makes sense. And then it does some more meaningful research, which is internet sales as a percentage of total retail sales. So it's good at doing the things that make sense using generative AI, where it's extrapolating what the next level of analysis might look like. So for me, the way I'm using it right now, day to day, is just a more visual version than deep research, where I can actually audit what it did versus take its word for it from a series of logs from deep research. And we get a report like this, which is very similar to what you'd see from deep research in general. But again, instead of just relying on the citations we have here, we have a way to just audit its overall flight path through its research. So if I could see some gaps it had, we can address them more easily through that visual interface. This next one's more interesting, and it came as an idea from a friend of mine who works in people analytics. And it says, I'm in the process of scaling my SaaS company, and I'm looking to understand the talent acquisition strategies of my main competitors. We just come up with a series of companies here. Can you please go on their respective career pages on their websites, as well as LinkedIn, and identify all the open roles they're currently hiring for? And then we mention what kind of roles we're looking for. And then key thing here is saying, please compile this information into a spreadsheet, which typically deep research alone would just output a table like we saw in the prior example. But in this case, agent mode now can create not only presentations, but CSV files. So on this task, it does a really good job overall. And this is something that you wouldn't necessarily have an API for to be able to speak to all these websites' career pages. And you usually wouldn't go to that trouble. And with this use case, it does a really decent job of being able to physically go on their websites, since we don't really have a human CAPTCHA stopping us like Alibaba, going to the open positions, reading through the entire page, logging that information to create that spreadsheet. And you'll see here it actually extracts the data from the underlying website to prepare it for the analysis. And after it does some internal programming in its personal terminal, we get something like this, where we can open this up and we have a CSV file that we can zoom in, and you'll see it's a decent length. We can download it from here and then continue the analysis, or we can just offload it and then continue asking questions and mix and matching and slicing and dicing the analysis as we need. For my personal branding test, I wanted to take advantage of tools that we haven't touched as of yet, which are these source tools like Gmail, Calendar, and Drive. So here we say, I want you to act as my personal brand and content strategist. your task is to help me identify and create content that establishes me as a thought leader. Here's your process. Analyze my expertise, go through my Google Drive documents and Gmail messages sent from the last 6 months. Based on your analysis of my writing and communications, identify the top 3 to 5 recurring themes. And then it can use Agent Mode, in this case, to take advantage of its web search to look for market trends, synthesize content opportunities based on looking at different platforms, and then schedule and prepare my Google Calendar for the upcoming week and find 2 available 90-minute blocks of time for me to work on this. So here we're trying to push Agent Mode as far as we can to see how many tools it can use at once and how it uses those tools. So one of the things I really like about this interface when it goes to talking to your connectors is you can see very visually what emails it's referencing, what it's doing, how it's interfacing with the different tools. Like you just saw Gmail, and now you're seeing Google Drive, and you can see which spreadsheets it's going through. And it gives you more of a feedback loop as to what's happening. It then does some research about certain pieces of content because it sees I'm very much into prompt engineering in my Google Drive and my Gmail. And then it looks through the latest developments in AI to complement what it sees in the email as well. So now it's combining data sources from internally and externally, bring them together to put together a full content roadmap. And then it finally goes through my Google Calendar to see where best it could fit those 2 blocks for me to do my ideation and planning. And the result is not only a full personal brand analysis and content strategy from the Google Drive and Gmail, but it also goes through my calendar and tells me exactly what slots seem to be available for my ideation or content creation sessions. So I'd give this as a big strength to this Agent Mode versus some of the weaknesses we've seen so far, where it's really good at actually marrying these tools and what they can do with the ability to browse and bring together those pieces of information to do the natural next step you're looking for. And one thing I wanted to show you as reinforcement for this specific use case is I gave the exact same prompt, but to normal deep research this time. And you can click and you can see right here, this is your normal type of feedback where you can just read a log of what it's doing. But that visual effect just gives you a better pulse on what's happening in real time versus looking at this after the fact. And for the second last use case, I wanted to explore the idea of acting as a marketing agency looking for leads in the dental clinic domain. So our prompt here says, my company provides marketing services to dental practices in the US. I'm looking to expand my client base in the state of Texas. Can you compile a list of all the dental practices in Dallas, Houston, and Austin? And I want you to find the name of the practice, the name of the lead dentist, their website, and their contact information. And again, here we're asking for a spreadsheet. So this one actually ran for a while. It ran for almost 3 to 4 times the amount that it usually does for 7 to 10 minutes. So it starts off by Googling different things like Dallas dental practice directory information. It goes through some websites. It even encounters some PDFs, which unlike Operator, which would completely seize up, it clicks through the PDFs, reads them using its own interface, probably using O3 behind the scenes, which is another useful skill that we'll also see in the last use case. And here it's reading through the PDF that it found on the website to look for contact information. And while it's doing so, it's storing in some form of cache the different contact information and usernames it's finding. And one interesting thing that it did here is it actually saved the HTML pages of these dental directory websites and store them for analysis, which I thought was actually fairly innovative versus just worrying about scraping or copy pasting certain names. So it was trying to actually be more efficient than just going on individual websites, which is something that I would hope for such a hype technology. And in terms of actually interacting or interfacing with websites, I did found it was very elegant at times. So if you go to the next part here, it's smart enough to go to About, and then, or Patients rather, and then it goes to About eventually. There we go. It's going to go and look for Meet the Doctors. So it's also pretty quick on that side. And I say the word quick very relatively here to things like Operator and computer use in the past, but it does a really good job of looking through, scrolling through the page, reading through the whole page, and extracting the names of the doctors. And the result looks something like this, where we do have some areas, actually a decent amount, that have an unknown lead dentist. So I'd hope that would be able to go through and do some deeper research to fill those gaps. But we do have a small sample, at least, of names, practice names, and numbers, where, again, I don't see this replacing something like Apollo or Clay for a while, but this could be a conversation that could be revisited in 3 to 5 months. And for this final case, it's the most complex one, and probably one of the most specific ones that I came up with. But around a year ago, we had a real estate brokerage come up to us and ask us, can you create an automation that will go on these very old legacy websites and go through and search for a specific state and look for the list of foreclosures or deeds, and then pull up those deeds, download the PDFs, analyze them with something like OCR, optical character recognition, and then create a report out of it. And we struggled quite a bit and didn't take on that project. So I was curious whether Agent Mode can take us closer to the point where we wouldn't need to build something like a mega scraper or a mega automation to pull this off. And the way this looks like is if I go to something like a Texas and I go scroll through, you'll see it's a very dated website, and you have to click on a random hyperlink right here. Let's say, I don't know, just Leon Grantor Guarantee, and then you can click on a specific date or a business last name, and you can get a series of PDFs as a result. So if I do a search here for foreclosures, and let me turn the search into something like January 2020 to 2024. I'm sure there's a better way to do this. Let's do 2025, search. We should get a series of PDFs here, and then you should be able to click on one of these and then analyze this using OCR or some form of image recognition. Now, very tricky task to do, even if you're trying to automate it. So I wanted to ask it here, and one thing that I did different with this prompt versus all the others is I actually recorded myself on screen clicking through the different parts of the website to get to the section that I cared about, and then I took that video and I went to aistudio.google, and then I uploaded the video and said basically, I have this AI agent that's going to browse the web for me and basically carry out a series of tasks, create a prompt of everything that you see me doing step by step so I can give it to it as an SOP or a series of instructions. So that allowed me to create this very verbose prompt here, walking through things like your task is to extract and organize foreclosure deed data from the Cherokee County, Texas, real property records website focusing on this specific period. This is the website link, like I said before, very useful to give it, especially in this use case. And then these are all the workflow steps where it basically spoon feeds it everything that would have to happen. And then what we say is a crucial note, acknowledge that the website charges for PDF downloads. So if there is something along those lines, don't execute it. And then we go through what the result should look like here. So it goes through for 15 minutes and it actually does a decent job. Not perfect, but decent. And it does manage to enter the dates we're looking for, search, navigate to the PDFs it gets as a result, and then it gives it a very good try at reading some of these almost impossible to read documents here. So it will click on a view image PDF, and it will load it up, and then we'll try to actually extract each part of the PDF. So it clicks on this image and pulls up this PDF and starts to try to zoom in into the image, read through, and give it its best shot. And one interesting thing is it zooms into the document over time, scrolls through to try to get those small pieces of information we're looking for. So it's able to navigate from line to line and click through each PDF and see whether or not it can extract the data it's looking for. And at times, it not learns, but it gets really good at doing what it did right now, which is auto zoom to try to basically see what's happening in that particular document and scroll through to quickly judge whether or not it's worth even spending time on that particular document. And the result is a report like this, where it tells us with its level of certainty as to whether or not it could actually see the document. So it will say not clearly visible, and then it will give you whatever information it was actually able to retrieve. So this is a good example of marrying agent mode with the good visual capability of something like O3 or O4 to be able to do this document extraction right here. But you can see we had a series of blank results. So this is definitely not ready to take on this level of task comprehensively, but compared to where we were just in January and February, this is a huge progression of what Operator was able to do before. And that's pretty much it. I tested it on a slew of other tasks as well in my paid community, such as building an end-to-end workflow end-to-end and testing it in your account, which happened to work for very simple workflows. And we also tested out the ability for this agent to spin up other agent modes within that browser to execute one task after the other. Now, if you want access to all of the prompts that I showed you in this video, I'll make them available in the first link in the description below. But if you want to be able to see even more use cases as well as all kinds of other resources to level you up in the AI game, check out the second link in the description below, and maybe I'll see you in the early AI adopters community. I'll see you next time.